Good morning. Nice to see so many people here this morning. We are here, a wonderful treat. Reverend Andy is joining us, and I've taken his messages to heart every time. His messages are life-changing for me. So I am Reverend Sue in service today, so if you would like any prayer support afterwards, I am here to be in service to you. And also, all the practitioners are in service to you. All it takes is a phone call. We're all on the website, so if you need anything, we're here for you. And there's still the prayer box as well. So I want to also remind you that our message here, we inspire and empower people to live spiritually fulfilling lives. That's who we are, and that's who you are, as we work together, making the world a better place. So right now, this is the fun part. I'm going to have Damien adjust the camera, and you're going to turn around and say hello to people on Facebook Live. We see you. We're happy that you're joining us. And those of us here today, send our love with a wave and a sense of namaste to you. Safe distance. So there you go. That's the happy moment. Thank you. So I appreciate everybody here in service, for the sound team and the usher and greeters helping us keep a nice, smooth flow. And Marty's at the board desk if you have any questions on anything that we talk about here. Just a very few announcements, and while I'm doing the announcements, if you don't mind turning off your cell phones so we can have an undisturbed service, we appreciate that too. Nothing happening much around here. There you go. So we do have, for those of you that are missing the social connection, it is pretty sweet. Each of the midweek Wednesday calls at 10 o'clock. If you want to be included in that on the Zoom invitation, just let Lori know. But it's really fun to see each other and to share heart to heart in those calls. And we've already been collecting a lot of books for the used book sale. There's a cutoff date because we need to quarantine the books, but the sale is going to start at the end of the month, so you have some time to bring your books in. Charlie tried to take some things to Goodwill, and I think he was in line for an hour and a half waiting to distribute, and he said the line just trails out. So if it's books that you're trying to share with others, this is a good place to bring them. That's it. Isn't that awesome? Anybody new with us today, visiting for the first time? Don't think so. We have welcome packets if you want to take one to anybody that's curious about our center as well. That being said, this is the part where we're just going to move into Damien doing a wonderful reading, and then we'll invite the bell. It's just a moment of silence to kind of center yourself, use it to breathe, use it to just fully be here, grateful. And then we'll do an opening treatment and then the message. So I'll invite Damien forward, and we will continue on. Thank you.
Good morning. Today's reading comes from the Science of Mind text. Ernest Holmes writes, "We should cease asking, why did God not make human beings good? If there had been a way which the divine creative process could have compelled humanity to appear on the scene of experience with all of their freedom, then this would have been done. The only way that God can evolve an individual, spontaneous and free, is to let it alone and allow it to waken to itself. The real idea of a human being, as distinguished from the outer personality, is that each is an individualized center of God consciousness. Our personality is the use we make of our divine individuality.
the beautiful sound of the bell, a touchstone to the heart, leading us deeply inward to remember who we are, to recognize our sense of oneness with the divine, our individualized expression of love towards humanity, towards all creatures, towards all of nature. We recognize our oneness and we smile deeply, remembering who we are. Through all the different challenges, as we meet up with various personalities, opinions, biases, we drop it all. We drop it all to stand in the one and to remember who we are. And we allow ourselves to be centered in love. Love as our propelling force in this universe. So I give thanks for this center standing strong in this truth. To all of the wise members and friends who continue to support this journey together, hand in hand, heart to heart, we know who we are. So again, just in gratitude, I release this prayer, respecting Reverend Andy's words today to deepen the message of truth for us all. Thank you, God. And together we say, and so it is. My pleasure, Reverend Andy. Such a joy to have you here. Thank you.
I never thought I would know what mask face is. You know, when you've been wearing a mask all day and you get to take it off, and it's like hat hair used to be. So it's that feeling of hoping things aren't running out of your face that were covered up. So I feel very honored to be able to not wear my mask for a minute while you all wear yours. So all right. There's a Norman Rockwell sort of image, and I don't even know if he ever painted this, but I think about this, where you would have a child, a school-age child, and you would put their back against a door jamb, and you would mark with a pencil, you know, a certain date and how tall they were, and so over time, if a family lived in a house for a long time, maybe even one of those houses that was in families for generations, there would supposedly be these marks, and we'd see where Uncle Henry grew up and Uncle Rob grew up and, you know, Aunt Mary grew up and those kinds of things, and where they were at different heights. Now, in my family, we never practiced that, but I had an uncle, my dad's brother. He had 4 children, and he was way into that, and so each one of his children had their own door jamb where he would measure them. And so he would have these pencil marks, and there was a couple of occasions where, and I don't know why he chose the times he did. Maybe they were the kids' birthdays or special occasions, but I was there when he would actually do it, and he would compare where they were on their growth with each other and things like that. And so we recognize if we think about that for just a moment, a child coming into this world and that representation of growth, of physical growth that happens in terms of height and things like that. But if we take a deeper look at that, and we think about the measure of that child as they're growing up in terms of that internal place where they are, you know, what shapes a child, what shapes that personality that's coming forth. And if we think of the life that exists within, the life within life, the life with a capital L. And so as metaphysicians, we might lend that word to the idea of a divine principle. And as you heard in the reading that was just shared with you, Holmes doesn't really talk about people and change. He doesn't use the word change. He doesn't He doesn't use really those kinds of words. The two ideas that he comes up with over and over again, when you're reading some of his material and you're expecting him to use the word change, he uses things like the unfoldment, the evolution. That's an interesting concept, because basically what he recognizes is that God, spirit, life with a capital L, whatever you want to call it, is ever unfolding. I remember growing up in Christianity, there was a concept within Christianity that I heard debated by the adults a lot. And this idea that we have free will to accept the path of salvation or not, and we pay the consequences, because at some point there's going to come a time where we are going to arrive. We're going to arrive, be there, whatever it is, get the gold watch, come to the gate, meet St. Peter, whatever that is. And when we arrive, then the decision we made to accept or not accept a particular doctrine is going to either punch our ticket or not. And so this was the question, because they would line that doctrine up with the idea that God knows everything, from the Alpha to the Omega, everything. God knows from the beginning of time to the very end of time. And so the idea would come up, and I would hear this hotly debated. If I have free will to become saved or not, but God knows all along whether I am or not, do I really have free will? And that's a really interesting question, and I grew up in that, and as a kid growing up in it and having some aspects of the religion I was raised in kind of freaked me out and scared me a little bit, because I was always afraid, where was I going to arrive? Where was I going to be? Was I going to be separated from those I loved or not? And as a little kid, that really scared me. And so later on, when I discovered metaphysics, and all of a sudden I heard this guy, Ernest Holmes, talking about the idea that God is unfolding. Now, you just heard the quote that was read. Ernest Holmes says, why are we so caught up in what's good or bad? Because nothing's arrived. Because if God could have made it good, God would have made it good, but it had to unfold on its own. Wow, that's amazing to me. And it's so in tune with science. When we look at physical evolution and this beautiful planet in which we live, whether it's the animals or the insects or the plants or ourselves or whatever, this basically turns the word, as Holmes would do, it turns the word evolution into God. It's a synonym of God. What is God? God is evolution. God is change. God is unfoldment. So in other words, that kid who we're measuring their height throughout their life, there's other things that are being measured as well. What is unfolding in that child in terms of how they show up to life and how life shows up to them? And I think about my uncle and his 4 children who were my cousins, and those 4 children, like any number of children within a family, become individuals. And they start going in completely different directions. And they have different personalities, and they have different responses. And some of them stay married forever, and some of them go through 3 divorces, and some of them have the same job for 30 years, and some of them have 10 jobs in 5 years, and all kinds of different ideas. And we think about what is it that is the catalyst for this unfoldment. So what Holmes says is basically there is something that is completely unique within each and every one of us that takes some time to come out through our life experience in terms of how we show up. There's a gentleman, and when I say the name Gandhi, and I would venture a guess that if I were to say, what does the name Gandhi mean to you and to any of us, and we would, the great warrior of peace, the great man of love and compassion and silence. In fact, I just used the word warrior, and I wouldn't even use that for Gandhi, just that quiet kind of place of peace and change and evolution and growth, and the deep care he had for everybody, and the deep care he had for his own principles, He is the voice that taught Martin Luther King how to move forward within his own movement. King believed that we could change things through compassion and love and connection, and through our voice as opposed to our weapons, and through words of love as opposed to words that are made of 4 letters. And that's the image that I have of Gandhi. But I want to talk about him for just a moment. He was born in 1869, and he made his transition in 1948. And so I'm going to give you a couple of time periods here that were very important to Gandhi. The first one is World War I, which ran between 1914 and 1918. So, why do I bring up World War I? Well, Gandhi became a lawyer in 1891. And when he became a lawyer, he studied law in Great Britain. And when he became a lawyer, a barrister as he was called, he went directly back to India to practice law there in terms of the English colony. In 1914, when World War I began, the British and the Germans were at loggerheads. And I don't want to get into the politics of it all, but they were heading towards war. And so Great Britain was really rattling the sabers in terms of taking on Germany and going to war with them to resolve whatever issues there were. And there was a young lawyer at that time named Gandhi, who was a proponent of India raising up an army on its own to help Great Britain fight that war. He became an advocate for World War I. And in fact, when India had problems doing this or didn't do this, he railed against his own country in terms of letters he wrote and speeches he gave. And Gandhi was always a powerful speaker about how did we ever lose our courage? We are an old people. We are an ancient people. We have a proud history of defense and warfare and standing our ground and being aggressive. And this is what he considered to be what he was pushing forward on anyone who would listen to him. And so India didn't get involved in the war in terms of as an army itself. As British subjects, I'm sure there were a lot of Indians who went to war. But Gandhi didn't get his way, and he was really upset about that because he felt like it was a way that India could be seen differently by the British government. So World War I ended in 1918, and that was the same year, the first year of the Spanish flu, which ran worldwide 1918 to 1920. And Gandhi was going along as a young lawyer and political activist, and then he became deathly ill. He succumbed to the Spanish flu. And Gandhi, who in his correspondence to his loved ones and friends, he was a prolific letter writer, as you would imagine a lawyer being a person of letters. His letters became smaller and smaller the sicker he got, and he went into a place where he could no longer see the world in terms of potentiality, but he began to see the room he was in close in around him. And in some of his letters that became very short paragraphs, he began to describe what he was going through in his generation's pandemic. And at one point, he said, "It seems like this sickness is conducting a war within me. I feel like my body is being attacked by an enemy." And in this atmosphere, in this place where he found himself, being a metaphysician and being someone who came from the eastern part of the world and looks at things from those Eastern ideas, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, he began to ask the question, what is it about me that has created this manifestation of what I'm going through physically? And in metaphysics, that's the question that we very often have to ask ourselves. It's not a question of putting ourselves down. It's not a question of I'm wrong, I'm bad, whatever. It's a question of where in consciousness have I been to open myself up to what I'm experiencing? That's a very religious science question. And in the conclusion he came to, clothed within the Eastern traditions, is he had to investigate the law of karma. And he said, he came to the conclusion that I have done something karmically in my life. It has put me into the cause and effect of where I am. And he concluded that his support of World War I was what he was experiencing now within himself. That his body was under siege, it was being attacked, and there was a war within himself. And he felt the ravages of that war. And in that moment, within his sickness, he began to explore in earnest the direction of the idea that violence always begets violence. And he looked at it from a consciousness and karmic point of view. What is Gandhi's most famous saying? An eye for an eye leaves the world full of blind people. That's you can see that you could probably find that bumper sticker in Reading today as you drive around. That is a quote that has followed him forever. And it transformed him into the person who later on would be the leader of compassion, the leader in civil disobedience, the leader of conversation, the leader of love, the leader of bringing about change from being present and open to those that we see as an enemy, as opposed to someone who is an advocate of war. When I heard this story, I heard it on National Public Radio on the program Radio Lab. The program was on a few weeks ago, and they devoted an hour to how pandemics and epidemics can shape history and how they can shape the way people feel. For example, this. Someday, years from now on Antiques Roadshow, someone is going to bring forward Grandpa's mask that said Giants on it, and they're going to talk about the reason he had that mask and what it meant and the pandemic and now what it's worth, and it'd probably be worth less than what I paid for it. But anyway, that's okay. Because this is our snapshot in time. This is, if you were to put us up against a door jamb and make that little pencil mark, this is what you would take into place in terms of where we are. Oh, that's the age he wore the mask. That's what he went through at that time. If Gandhi had, say, made his transition somewhere between 1914 and 1918, which was World War I, how would we see him historically today? Imagine his memorial service if he had passed away between 1914 and 1918. This young lawyer who was advocating war, who was disappointed that the Indian nation did not join the British Empire in a war on a formal level. That India had lost its way, morally, ethically. It had lost its standing in the world because it would not go to war. Imagine that. Imagine the different way that we see Gandhi because we have the benefit of the rest of his life. The same can be said of Abraham Lincoln, another man who was a great letter writer and speaker and communicator. There are snapshots within his public life, not just when he was young, but within his public life. Also, he was a lawyer too, by the way, where you would say he was pro-slavery. He was pro-states' rights in the South. You would say that about Lincoln, the great emancipator. But there are forces within our lives that allow us to unfold, as what Holmes says. The unfoldment of who we are. You know, the question today is, who are we? And the answer, according to our belief system, religious science and metaphysics, is we are a core of divinity, a core of God that is unfolding into a completely authentic expression of some kind. Now, Holmes, He teaches us, as students of his philosophy, to look at anything and say it's whole, complete, and divine. Let's look at the pandemic. Andy, what do you think of the pandemic? It's whole, complete, and divine. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Holmes is teaching us, he's not telling us to lose our minds. He's not telling us to be Pollyannish. He's not telling us to be controversial. He's saying that this is just a snapshot. We don't know where this is going. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know that there's a young lawyer who's going to become a giant of peaceful protest and movements within the world. We don't know that there's another young lawyer who's going to become an emancipator as the truth begins to unfold. This idea of what is it that's coming forth within us. Holmes encourages us throughout all his writings to not be hung up in terms of where we are at any given place or how we define ourselves. I met a man one time when I was, I got to know him pretty well because when I went into the Navy, I was 18 years old. I just turned 18 years old. And went through the whole process. I was up here in Northern California, and you go to the recruiter station, and Vietnam had ended a couple years before, and I wanted to get out of the town I'd spent my life growing up in and get away from parents and family and school and everything else, and I wanted to go see the world. I wasn't overly patriotic, but it seemed like, for someone who had no skills and no great education, it was a place where I could go see the world. So I go to a recruiter, raise my right hand, take all the tests, do all the stuff that took about a month to get through. And finally, all of us from Northern California were bused down to Oakland, where we were going to get on a plane and be flown to San Diego, where we'd go to boot camp. And we were in Oakland for about 2 days, assembling in some hotel that the Navy had a contract with. I met a gentleman there, and most of us were 17, 18, 19, 20 years old. We were a bunch of kids. But there was this one guy who showed up, and he turned out to be my roommate in that hotel for a couple of days. And he was like about 28 years old. It was really strange. And so I said to him, I said, "What are you doing going into the Navy now?" And he told me his story. He said, I did really well in high school. I was a great student. I was a great athlete. I went to college, and he ended up with an advanced degree in marine biology. I don't know if it was a master's or whatever, but it was an advanced degree. And after college, after being in college for 4, 5, 6 years, he decided to go. A friend of his got him a job as a ranch hand in Montana. He'd never even hardly seen a horse in his life. But, something about it caught his attention, so he went up there. He was tired of being in school, went up there to Montana, learned how to ride a horse, learned how to mess around with cattle, and he did that for a couple of years, 1.5 years, 2 years. His family was really upset with him. They were upset with him because after college, he went to go become this ranch hand, and they didn't understand why it was marine biology anyway. Why didn't he get a degree in business or something like that? So he comes back into California, and he decides to get kind of a corporate desk job, and he did that for a very short period of time. They're, like, "What are you doing? You're a smart person. You have this degree. What are you doing sitting behind some desk at some auto parts company," or whatever it was. Nothing against that, but they were all on him about that. And so then he decides, "I'm going to enlist in the Navy for 4 years." And they just thought he was crazy. "What are you doing?" And so I sat in that motel room, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm trying to find myself." Now, I was born in 1957, so by the time 1970 came, I was 13 years old. So I'm part of that generation. I heard all that hippie stuff, right? Got to go find myself. I remember my family had friends, other families whose kids would go to Berkeley or UC Davis or whatever, and the family would spend all this money and stuff. And they would go, all of a sudden they'd run off to Europe. And what are your kids doing? Well, they're trying to find themselves. Woodstock and the Summer of Love and all that kind of stuff, people trying to find themselves. And so I was used to hearing the term, but sitting in a motel room with this guy that I had just met, and we were both about ready to take off into this adventure. He said, I'm trying to find myself. He said, I know that there's something more to me. This is not who I am. And I was so envious of the fact that he had a college degree. I was so envious of the fact that he'd spent time in Montana. He said, but this isn't me. There's something within me coming forth. And I remember at that time, an 18-year-old kid, I had no idea what he's talking about. But then take me forward to 35 and 40 and 45. I know what he's talking about. The different times in our life where we come to a place and say, there is something more. There's something more here for us that is going to become who we unfold to be from moment to moment. If you were to go back 30 years in my life, 30 some years, and let's say I were to pass away, and you were to go to my memorial probably would have been a wake. And there would have been no talk about Reverend Andy or anything else that I've done. Because I was so far away from the incarnation that I am today in terms of what has unfolded over all these years. All these years of my version of the Spanish flu, my version of the dark roads I've gone down, my version of what I've experienced in life, my version of discomfort and disconnection. Ernest Holmes implores us to be ultimately optimistic, to say, the Gandhis, the Lincolns, the us are unfolding. That is who we are. We are evolutionary beings. We are beings of unfoldment. We are on an eternal journey. And I have a quote here. In the end of my quote, he says, and this will go on forever. Somewhere, the spirit of a man once called Gandhi is still traveling. Somewhere, Lincoln is still traveling. We are a life force that transcends any challenge that comes up as part of our journey, that is part of the unfoldment. This philosophy is ultimately a philosophy of optimism and potentiality, regardless of what we're going through. It doesn't mean that we don't cry. It doesn't mean that we aren't there for each other. It doesn't mean that our hearts don't go out to people. It doesn't mean that we're cold and calloused. But Holmes wants us to take a larger view. The historic view, if you will. The way that we can do for Gandhi and for Lincoln. And to occupy that place of, maybe I have a title, maybe I have a gender, I have a title, I have a job, I have an age, I have family, but how much of that really defines me? Or is it all about what is unfolding? So I'm going to leave you with this quote from Holmes, and I gave you the back end of it first. He says, evolution or creation, which he considered to be the same thing, is the logical result of the outpush of life into self-expression. It is the coming forth of spirit, and since the idea is still in an unfolding state, it appears as though we live in an imperfect universe. If we saw Gandhi at one point, we would say that's an imperfect universe. Evolution is the time and process through which an idea unfolds to a higher state of manifestation and will go on forever. I belong to a philosophy that does not have a heaven or a hell. I don't have a St. Peter. I don't have a place I'm going. I have the journey. That's what I have. And I love the fact that I kind of know who I've been. I might know who I am, but I really don't know where I'm going. But somewhere within me, there is something absolutely, completely divine coming forth. And that's what's on the other side of this mask. This is a snapshot. And it will contribute to the highest manifestation that all of us are. All right. So I'm going to take us into an affirmative prayer. Oh, as we come together in consciousness and bring our attention to the reality that God is truly all there is. And today we consider the name we give God as evolution and creation. We consider the name we give God as unfoldment. And we are so grateful for those ideas. We are so grateful for the opportunity we have as we take stock of our lives on a daily basis, the journey that we are traveling. Because it turns the journey we are traveling into sacred ground, no matter where we are. And it allows us to broaden our own understanding of this universe and our relationship with Spirit. I am so grateful for this teaching. I am so grateful for this center, and I'm so grateful for this wonderful day. And I embrace it as part of my own evolution and growth and the outpushing of Spirit. And in my gratitude for this, I let my word go, knowing that it's so, and so it is. All right. Thank you.
Such an awesome man. That's who you are. Yeah, that was beautiful, inspiring. So this is the time we close our service, and we invite you to, if you have an offering with you today, that we'll spend a moment blessing that offering, and there's baskets at each door. As you exit, you can place your donation there, and we are indeed so grateful for that. So just in the moments of knowing, as you hold that gift, think to yourself deeply, gratefully I give with an attitude of abundance, for I know as I give, I do receive. Those aren't just words. Because as you give in this life, you do receive. So we bless the gifts that continue to allow ourselves to do services online, to do in-person services, to have the ways and means to have a connection during these different times. So with hearts filled with gratitude, we simply say thank you from the depth of our heart back to you. So releasing that knowing, I know it's already so, and so it is. So this, we are completing our service with another beautiful song from Dalton. He's putting these together for you. And this is a perfect song to end this service. Open your heart to our Dalton now.
my heart to fear, and it was grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the very hour I first believed. Through many dangers, many, many toils and snares, I have already come, but it